All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Luke Thomas. This is the weekly live chat I do here on MMA Fighting. Today is July 16th, Wednesday, July 16th, 2014. And I've already told you my name. Today on the docket, we'll talk about, let's see, it's happened after the last chat. So if you want to talk about Holly Holm and what it means for her signing and whether it'll be Gina Carano and whether it'll be Ronda Rousey and her title future, that's fine. If you want to talk about Floyd Mayweather and Ronda Rousey, I actually don't mind, given the things that Floyd Mayweather said here in D.C., by the way. That's where the comments were made. UFC 177 now has a co-main event. Let's see. UFC Fight Night 45 is tonight. UFC Fight Night 46 is in a couple of days. A few days, I should say. So lots to talk about, as there always is on this here live chat podcast doohickey that you and I do. As you can tell, I have a microphone today. Shout outs to Dark Toby. I hope it sounds good. It should. It looks pretty good on the from what I can tell, like the system here and registering sound. It may be a little bit louder than normal because, well, I'm using a microphone. So you may have to adjust your set accordingly. And I appreciate everyone attending. Today's chat is not brought to you by, but I'm drinking Fiji water. It's my favorite kind of water, that or Volvic, because you know, I'm a pretentious D-bag from Washington, D.C. So delicious. And if you wouldn't mind, God, no, I got my diet sodas in here. If you hear this noise, that means you should tell folks you're watching. Get on various social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, whatever it is that you're on, and let folks know you're watching. You can link up the video chat window. You can link up the post. You can do whatever you like. And let me know, by the way, if the microphone has any issues or anything like that. As you can tell, I desperately am in need of a haircut, but what can I do? I didn't have any time today. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Let's open up these. Oh, damn, there's a lot of questions today. Oh, one note, because everyone got so bitter at me the last time. I'm not saying I won't answer any questions about it today, but I'm going to try to stay away from any questions about oversaturation. Not that it's not an important topic. It's the most important topic, I think, in MMA today, to be honest, which is why I enjoy talking about it, and because some people are in some sort of deep-seated denial about it, while, you know, there's pretty clear evidence about it everywhere. But just to take a break from it, so everything's not dominated by it, I won't answer any questions today. But in my defense, if there was a lot of questions about it last time, it's because y'all asked them. I don't just ad-lib. I follow what you want me to ask. But even this time, if you ask about oversaturation, I probably will not answer it. Let's talk about some other things this time, at least for one time. It's going to be hard to talk about UFC 177 without it, but I'll do my best. Okay? All right. Let's go. Conor McGregor's comeback. Is this the most anticipated return to ever happen in the history of the sport? His greatness can't be denied. Well, I know you're trolling, but I will say I'm pretty excited about it. I think a lot of folks are excited about it. Folks are wondering, I mean, consider like what we use to budget our money around. MMA Fighting could have sent someone to Jersey for a relatively low cost, and we chose not to. And we sent folks to Ireland instead, and that whole card is not particularly great. Gunnar Nelson's on it, and that's important. But Conor McGregor could be the next big thing, you know. We don't know that he is, but he could be. He could be. It's worth at least looking into, and it's an important moment for the history of Irish MMA. I think that's a fair statement to make. It's not much of a history to speak of necessarily, but certainly this is a key moment, and this is on Fight Pass. You know, we chose to send people to cover something on a Fight Pass. I don't think we've ever done that for a Fight Pass show. Certainly not one that's been overseas. I think all the Fight Pass shows have been overseas, but you get the idea. That just tells you what our editorial priority is. It's like, even though we know it's probably, from a live event standpoint, unclear about what kind of traffic it will draw. Typically, Fight Pass shows do almost nothing. This one might be different, and it's worth covering a guy who could be a big star. You know. Fiji water. Love it. Murderer's Row. If Weidman goes through Vitor, Jacare, Rockhold, and Gagard, I'm assuming you mean Musasi, along with already having wins over Silva twice and Machida, would it be equal to Jones's Murderer's Row, or would it forever be underappreciated and viewed lower than the opponents Jones had faced and defeated because Jones has wins over more ex-UFC champ? In your opinion, which Murderer's Row is more impressive? They're both pretty impressive, but there is something to consider about what Jones had done. Jones did he had the best year of any combat, or I should say, he had the best year of any MMA fighter ever. Now, that doesn't mean he had the single greatest accomplishment in one fight itself, but if you're looking at a calendar year for competition, I believe it was 2011. Let me look up his record. He had 4 fights in 1 year. 4. And he won them all against, I think, at least 3 of the 4, or at least 2 of the 4 were UFC champions. Let me pull this up here. His record. All right, so in 2011, he beat Ryan Bader in February, stopped him in the second round. The very next month, 5 weeks later, he beat Mauricio Hua by stoppage in the third round. In September, so a bit of a break that year, and I was there for that. He beat Quentin Jackson in the fourth round. So that's 2 former champions. He took the belt from one and then defended it against another previous champion. And then just a couple months later, in December, he stopped Lyoto Machida with a standing guillotine, dropped him right there. I mean, that is unbelievable. Even Chris Weidman went the distance with Machida. John Jones stopped him in the second round, with a standing guillotine, slumped over, eyes still open. I mean, that was an unbelievable finish. So he not only beat all these guys, he stopped them all. He stopped them all, and he did it 4 times inside of 1 calendar year. That is just remarkable. Now, certainly, if Weidman can beat all these guys, if he can beat Jacare, if he can beat Musasi, if he can beat whoever's next, Vitor, or however they sort of structure it, maybe Machida will get a rematch. I don't think that's out of the question either. At some point, not immediately, but you get it down the line. Then you can look at his body of work and you can make some pretty strong claims about it, assuming he gets past all these guys. But the way in which John Jones did that in that short amount of time with that level of dominance against that much verifiable greatness is just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. And the thing about those 2 Silva fights, and you guys know I picked Weidman to win in both of those, they were a little weird. I don't think that undercuts clearly that Weidman is the better fighter, but the reason why, or at least part of the reason why Weidman versus Machida had intrigue was that there was a lot about Chris Weidman we didn't really know. We didn't know a lot about John Jones either, except he just kept sort of raising the bar, but you had a sense about what the things were that he could do, at least certainly after the, I guess, well, for me, even before the Hua fight, but I think there were some deniers. I think that Weidman's also a little bit older. John Jones is a little bit younger, less time in the game. There's just so much about that run, that 2011 run that John Jones went on, that is going to be pretty hard to beat. I mean, in the end, if you beat all the same guys, then the differences are pretty insignificant. But that 2011 from John Jones will go down as pretty damn special. Let's see. People are, I don't know if anyone else, it's clipping like crazy. Let's see. Is that better? All right, hopefully that's better. Hopefully the mic isn't clipping too much. If it is, I'll just remove it. Let's see. People are saying at the bottom. Just want to make sure it's working. No one else seems to be complaining about it too much. Let's see on the thing. Sorry about this, Josh. I want to make sure it doesn't. Test. Test. That's better, right? Test. I don't know. I have no idea. I really have no idea what I'm doing most of the time I'm on here. It's amazing that here we go. Is that better? All right. All right, let's go back up. Maybe I'll talk a little bit away from it. Therapeutic use exemption. Luke, did you happen to read the article a week or so ago about A-Rod receiving a therapeutic use exemption in 2000 by the Major League Baseball? I did happen to read it, yeah, but that wasn't the first I'd heard of it, actually. Agree or disagree with Dana? I mean, should not be surprising. Although I had a discussion with I have an article coming out next week, which I think you guys will like. It's not finished yet, but I had a discussion last week. People are coming to the bottom. Okay. With a relevant expert in the field of drug testing, PED testing, and I asked him which leagues have the most stringent PED testing policy and which have the least. And basically what his answer was that they all have problems, but that Major League Baseball's in response to what their steroid era problems caused, have the best ones, and that the rest are all pretty equivalent. They're not very good. The NBA's was not demonstrably that much better than NFL's and NFL's to NHL's, and that included UFC. Now, they have certain parts in each of their own testing regimens that might be better than the other, but as a sort of general whole, not that great. So for A-Rod to have gotten one in 2007, not entirely surprising. Okay. Do you agree or disagree with Dana's comments regarding Rousey not getting deserved pound-for-pound credit because she's a woman? The way Dana worded his argument was terrible. This is his words, not mine. It's clear the women's division isn't as strong like any of the men's divisions. The talent pool in the women's division is shallow compared to any of the men's. Do you believe a pound-for-pound rankings should be separated into two categories, one for men and one for women? It's not fair to group men and women together since Rousey is so much above her peers, where she trained all her life and other fighters just got into the sport. Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't really know where I would put Rousey on the pound-for-pound list if she made the top 10 at all, because she's just competing in a space where her rivals are not on the level. You know, listen, pound-for-pound will always be one of these things where it's a very difficult and often moronic discussion among all parties, myself included. But the truth about it is Rousey's dominance, I mean, no one is questioning that. What you're trying to do in pound-for-pound is evaluating the significance of it. And it's significant historically. It's significant from a current standpoint in terms of her being a celebrity, but in terms of athletic accomplishment, and while very, very noteworthy, and it's not Rousey's fault, it's not her fault, but the reality is you have to sort of be honest, she's competing in a side of the sport that is very much in its developmental stages. It's not the same. People are like, what about Anderson Silva coming over and doing what he did at middleweight? I mean, middleweight was a division in transition then too, but Evan Tanner was the champion before, and then Rich Franklin took it, and then Silva took it. I mean, there's any number of ways to measure just how much more established it was, but one way you can tell is that Rousey was just sort of granted the belt. I mean, who else were they going to give it to? Women's MMA has been splintered for a super long time, women fighting in non-existent weight classes at catchweights without divisions getting stacked, and the fact of the matter is they haven't recruited high-level athletes very well. The men's side, you have Olympians getting submitted in the first round. It just hasn't happened on the women's side at all. Those kinds of athletes just aren't over there yet. It's not Rousey's fault. You can't, you have to be very careful about contextualizing her accomplishments, because it could often sound like you're bashing her. Well, she hasn't done anything yet. That's not what we mean. What we mean is she's done everything you could possibly do, but she's done it against competition that is simply not up to par. And not just because she's better than them, but because they are categorically not on the same level, even by comparison to the males. Even the weak men's bantamweight division is ahead of that one. You're just not getting the kind of athletes over there. You're not getting the kind of people who put in the time, a combat sports perspective. You're just not. You're just absolutely not getting that. So that will change. I think Rousey is a bit of a pioneer, but until the athleticism has gone up and the skill development has increased. I mean, you've got people competing. You know, I don't want to name any names, but there are people competing in that division who are not good. They're just not good. And they're in the UFC because UFC just doesn't have a lot of options. Ronda Rousey is very good, but you know, I'm typically sympathetic to arguments that women don't get the credit they deserve because they're women. I'm not suggesting like that's an unfair piece of analysis generally, but in this particular case, it's pretty clear that's not the overarching factor. The overarching factor is that the women's side of the sport is very much in its developmental stages. It's very inchoate. It needs work. Has Jones, I'm assuming you mean John Jones, plateaued as a fighter? In your opinion, has John Jones' technique leveled off? Do you think these talented fighters are sort of cursed where the game comes so easy to them they don't have as much motivation to work hard, therefore not fighting to their true potential? I don't know that we can really sort of say that he's plateaued. I do wonder about his wrestling, as I mentioned before. But I sort of thought his adaptive... The problem is, like, even if your technical skills have sort of plateaued a bit, if your ability to improvise and your ability to, in a fight, adapt, and your ability to make key, important decisions that seem innovative at the time in a fight, it doesn't really matter if your technique is sort of hasn't like dramatically increased fight over fight. You're going to have a lot of different options and ways to use it. I think that's sort of the key consideration here. For John Jones, let's assume that his technique has plateaued, and I don't think that it has, but let's just assume that it has. He still is going to be able to find interesting, clever uses for it. He has a brain that works that way. He has when he's holding on to Glover's arms, like that's a tactical decision that he made in the middle of a fight. It doesn't require a substantial amount of training. This is not something that has to be developed in the gym over time, but it's something he was just able to do in the middle of a fight to wear down the power punching of his opponent over the course of 5 rounds. Pretty special. That's not a skill exactly, but it's an innovative use of his body. It's an innovative, clever trick to employ in the middle of a fight. Also, sort of that when Teixeira had that lazy underhook, and then Jones came over and cranked it, and people were like, "That's cheating." Yeah, show me. That's dirty. Yes, show me the rule book of dirty, please, will you? Oh, I'm sorry. You mean the one that doesn't exist? The one that's made up in your mind? Ah, yes, that dirty rule book. Right. Stuff like that is just creative. Those aren't things he drills. Those aren't things he practices. Those are things he may never use again. But they're just clever, different uses of his body and space and existing skill sets that come to him naturally. So, how much has his jab improved? How much has his striking improved, such as we understand it? That's probably slowing down a little bit. It can only get so fast so quickly, or so good so quickly, I should say. But that's the key consideration with Jones. It's just how interesting he can make use of space and his own body, even for things he's never practiced. Is Nate, I'm assuming you mean Nate Diaz, losing popular support with all the S-talking and no fighting? And did it get to the point that even though he should get paid more, he is simply not right anymore? Wouldn't one single great performance do him more favors on his new contract demands? I mean, I used to read way more pay him comments than shut the F up and fight comments. It is the other way around now. Also unblock me on Twitter. If I blocked you on Twitter, you said something stupid to me, but it's a good question. And you're probably right. I have certainly seen, in terms of popular appeal, a bit of a shift, a bit of a transition. So what? So what? This isn't about what everyone else thinks you should do. This is about what you think you should do and what you think is right. And yeah, listen, is going out and fighting and making $60,000 more than not fighting and not making $60,000? Like, this is basic arithmetic. I mean, no one's debating that. That's not the point. The point is, Do you tell someone, you know what, I think you're grotesquely underpaying me, and I'm just not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to take it. If that's the way you feel, then that's fine. Then that's the way you feel. But if you don't feel that way, if you feel like, I know I'm worth more than this, and I think that what the contract you offered me was nonsense, and I signed it because I just simply didn't realize how bad it was at the time, and now I do. He's not breaking any laws by not fighting. He doesn't have to fight. He can just sit there. I don't see what the problem is. It's a principled stance. He's not trying to run for office. He's not trying to gather. Maybe he is in some capacity, but he's not. This is not a campaign. This is not a public campaign, at least not a very coordinated one, to get everyone to rally to my side. Let's affect change here. It's a little bit public, it's a little bit of a, he is tweeting. I can't deny it's entirely a private affair. But this is not a huge, massive, coordinated effort to get things changed. He's simply making a principled stance about what he thinks is right. And I don't see how anybody can fault him for it. You don't have to agree. You can say, well, I think you're wrong. I think you should be fighting for 60 and 60. I don't think you're worth that much. If you were, you would have negotiated better. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you shouldn't take that as what he's doing as license to then say, well, he's categorically wrong. He's objectively wrong. He's not objectively wrong. These are decisions he's making about his life. And they're decisions he's making about his life based on things that matter to him and how he navigates himself through the world. Maybe he hates the idea. I mean, hates it to an extent that I can't even possibly communicate, that he believes he's underpaid or that he got swindled. Maybe he feels that way. I'm not saying that he was or he wasn't. I don't know. But if you feel strongly about something, that's what you should do. You should match your behavior. It's how you feel about something. I saw this today. Like, how you feel about something is irrelevant. It's how you act on it. Oh, I'm a good person because I believe that, whatever you want to believe. But unless you really act in a particular way that brings about that kind of reality for yourself and the people around you, it's irrelevant what you believe. You have to act on it, and sometimes you have to make painful decisions. And the fact of the matter is, maybe the Diaz brothers are helping out future fighters who also want to hold out for pay, or maybe they're not. Maybe this effort will all be in vain. But at the end of the day, they can take a principled stance. And if they no longer want to take a principled stance, if they want to just say, all right, you know what, I will just go make money, then that's fine too. But I'm never ever going to fault someone for thinking rationally about something, which I do think they are. Like, this matters to me. It matters to me that I feel like I got a really unfair contract. And it matters to me that I think that the UFC could really use my services. Diaz brothers have never pulled out of a fight due to injury. And Nick may wind up getting the Anderson Silva fight. We'll see what happens. But with Nate, is he the same star his brother is? Probably not. But if he feels like he has a certain worth and he feels like he could have been made a lot more and he felt like he was treated unfairly and wants to take a principled stance of not fighting until that situation is rectified, why on earth are we wringing our hands over it? That's what you should be applauding him, not berating him. You don't have to agree, but I don't see how this is particularly controversial. All right, I'm going to try to answer this without getting into the you-know-what topic. UFC 177. Got to be honest, I never thought I'd be skipping an event with 2 UFC title fights. Now that I see them, though, I probably will. I don't see Carriazo as a legitimate challenger, and Barao does not deserve a rematch. I look at this event and I see that maybe the problem isn't lighter weight guys are not popular. Seems that the problem is that the UFC does not make good decisions with those weight classes. Thoughts? And then someone else follows up with, which was also wrecked. Let us not, this is their words, not mine. Let us not forget that Dillashaw beat Barao when no one gave him a chance. However, I do see your point. Carriazo isn't the obvious choice for Mighty Mouse, but as far as the flyweight division is concerned, few have done more lately to deserve it outside of Dodson, who, though, as we know, towards ACL. 3 straight wins in that division seems to be on par for course until more depth is added. As far as Barao is concerned, I understand the reason that was given was the rematch, and let's not kid ourselves, it was for no other reason but marketability. But I don't agree with it. That being said, Barao has more than a fair shot of taking the belt right back with some small adjustments to his game, starting with countering the footwork of Dillashaw. I am intrigued by the fight because I truly don't know if TJ can have a repeat performance. As far as Mighty Mouse and Carriazo, I'm using the Dillashaw versus Barao #1 rule to keep a mind open because you just never know. Lots of problems here. First of all, you can like what you like. I saw this fight and I was just like, I mean, just completely dead on arrival as far as being intriguing. Mighty Mouse is going to run over Chris Carriasso, and I know everyone said the same thing about Dillashaw. Even Dillashaw's resume was significantly better than what Carriasso has to offer. And MMA is crazy. Mighty Mouse could eat one shot when he zigs when he's supposed to zag, and that changes it all. But I'd bet on Mighty Mouse to win 2 out of 3, if not all 3. It's just not compelling. And more to the point, it's like Carriasso hasn't really evidenced himself as a reasonable title challenger. I think his record against winning his flyweight record against people in the UFC, the people he's beaten, their flyweight record is a combined 1-6, or 1-8 maybe, something really bad. So it's completely uninteresting as a title fight. Dillashaw versus Brow, everyone's like, who wants to see that rematch? Really? Who wants to see the Aslan Sal rematch? More to the point, who wants to pay for the Aslan Sal rematch? More to the point, who wants to pay for this card? I would submit to you that these 2 Fight Night cards together are better than that card, at least from a maybe not from a perspective of what sells and what doesn't, but certainly from a fan enjoyment perspective. I think UFC could have canceled 176 and 177 and do themselves a favor. I'm sure they wouldn't agree, but just telling you how I feel. I don't know, y'all. I don't know what you want me to tell you. The lighter weight divisions are going to take a long time to get better, to get interesting. No one in those divisions seems to want to stand out in any kind of way beyond what they do in the cage, which matters to most of us, but not nearly enough of us. I don't know how you talk about this without talking about the other issues. I mean, what is there to say? Honestly, it's not an interesting card. It's not going to do well on pay-per-view. It's the main event or the co-main event with Demetrius Johnson. It probably is going to be very much not competitive. And even if the main event is competitive, it's not. You're talking about somebody who has no tenure as a pay-per-view star at all. I would still submit to you that UFC Fight Night 50 is the best card on the horizon. Maybe Fox 12, but UFC Fight Night 50 is the one I'm looking forward to most. It's not here until September, too, It's just a bad card. It's just a bad card. It's yeah. Only thing I would say, though, is people making comments like, well, Carriasso isn't the obvious choice. Zach Makovsky would have been a better choice, first of all, and a more competitive fight, and a better resume. Lots of reasons why I think he'd have been better. You could also sort of waited and put the winner of McCall's fight this weekend and put them in there. Even Brad Pickett outright would have been a better choice. There's lots of better choices than Carriasso, first of all. And second of all, it's like none of that really matters. Like who you're really going to put in there against Demetrius Johnson? Bagautinov was like the clear #1 contender, and that was a disastrous buy rate. Like Carriasso or anybody else, it's like no one knows who any of these guys are. Demetrius Johnson refuses to, and I understand why. He wants to be true to himself. That's fine, but he refuses to promote anything about himself other than how he fights. Again, which is totally his choice. I understand that. And then you've got a guy who had no real exposure on pay-per-view before, is now their champion, and has to move into the pay-per-view space because they have pay-per-views to fill. I will say this, though. Like, I really feel like, I don't know how logistically how possible it is, but, the cancellation of 176 is not the last time they'll cancel a pay-per-view. Again, I think they should just cut 177 as well, or make it free, which they won't, but I'm just saying they should. I don't know how logistically possible this is, but when the one thing Bjorn Rebney stated that still I think kind of matters to fans is that we're going to do a pay-per-view when we can. We're not going to just sort of schedule them all out ahead of time and then just fill in the holes, which is exactly what's happening here. Like, they're not building a card here where they can just say, man, we're going to really answer fan demand. We're going to have a Barao versus Dillashaw rematch, and we're going to have Carriasso fight Demetrius Johnson because we want to make sure the fans are getting what they want. That's not what's happening here. They're plugging holes. They're plugging holes because they have a calendar they have to meet. Again, maybe it's not possible, but were it contractually or logistically possible, if the UFC can move into a space where they had contracted fewer pay-per-views and then could do more pay-per-views as the opportunities arose, that would be, I think, a significantly better improvement. Because the truth is, the UFC is putting out a lot of good free content. They are. I don't think that you can deny that. UFC on Fox 12 is a great, sensational card, and everyone is looking forward to it, as they should. UFC has a lot of good content out there that's available in that particular way, but behind the paywall, if you're setting out a certain number of calendar events and then you have to just fill in the holes, it's tough. It's tough. And so I don't, again, maybe this is all conversation that goes nowhere. The pay-per-view business is very secretive in how it works, but if it were possible to say, okay, we're going to guarantee 8 pay-per-views a year, and we're going to add on more of those as we can, I don't know who'd be opposed to that. Mastery equals boring. Hi, Luke. I was wondering how you would respond to the statement that skill mastery in combat sports almost always equals boring fights. Floyd Mayweather is the best boxer on the planet, but never really put on a performance that would wow a casual audience. I'd never say it on this chat. Similarly, GSP might be the best MMA fighter of all time, but did so effectively neutralizing his opponent's offense to 0. I was just wondering, as the sport evolves, we're going to see the highest level of fighters be able to maximize risks to a certain point that their fights become academic and not aesthetically pleasing. You might. So, first of all, someone mentions Anderson Silva do is pretty entertaining. So first of all, it's not always true that it leads to necessarily being so boring. But what I would say is, when you get guys like GSP or you get guys like Aldo, they clearly see themselves as ahead of the pack. They clearly see themselves as going to be ahead of the pack for a fairly, for at a minimum the foreseeable future. I think they fight in a way to maximize their ability to hold position, right? It's one thing when you're coming up and you have to do things necessary to gain position. I just think it's natural human instinct that once you achieve it and you can make a reasonable calculation about your odds to keep it, unless you have a certain kind of different drive, a fair number of people, even combat athletes, are going to compete in a certain way to hold position. They want to maintain their health. They want to maintain their status. They want to maintain, their position in the queue, both promotionally and technically. And so they're going to fight in a way to make sure that, yes, the fights may go long and they may be rigorous, but they're not going to compete in a way that could really fundamentally challenge all that they've accumulated. Once you've accumulated wealth and position and status and accomplishment and a resume, you're much more willing to hold on to it and do just enough to keep it because you're already kind of there. I just think it's a natural way to sort of, it may be unfortunate, but it's just a very common thing. But again, that won't be the case universally. There will be I don't think Lennox Lewis was ever really, I mean, he wasn't like balls out exciting, but I wouldn't call him boring either. Now the Klitschko's will be a little bit different, but they also don't have any rivals. And Mayweather is just known for being defensive. But Pacquiao has accomplished a lot too, and he's definitely eaten the canvas a number of times. Certainly against that and Marquez in that 4th fight, boy. God, that was bad. By the way, one point I want to make, I don't know if anyone's going to bring it up. Did y'all see the Canelo versus Lara fight? This was hilarious to me. Everyone was like, first of all, I had a 115, 113 Lara, okay? And everyone was, not everyone, but a lot of people were saying it was 115 and 113 Canelo. Okay, deal. Fine. No problem with that. You had one judge, Levi Martinez, had it 117, 111 Canelo. This is what drives me crazy. Okay, everyone's like, well, you could have it for Canelo. Dude, you don't get to tell me that the rounds are difficult to score and could have gone either way, and then tell me that the coin flip just happened to land that many times on heads. It doesn't work that way. If you're admitting it's difficult to call, if you're admitting that the difference between them was borderline negligible, then how do you defend a 117, 111 scorecard? How do you do that? It's just not possible. You have to be evaluating the wrong things or have some kind of prejudices that you either know about cognizantly or you just have and you're not even aware of. But I just want to make that point clear. It's fine if you scored the fight for Canelo 115, 113. I had it for Lara 115, 113. But you can't make the argument, well, listen, it was a close fight. I mean, you can say Canelo won. It's a close fight. You can say Lara won. Okay, then you automatically eliminate the possibility that 117, 111 is a verifiable, justifiable, rational scorecard. By your own admission, you're saying that's not possible. On the MMA Hour this week, Demetrius Johnson told Ariel Helwani, who is in Ireland, by the way, that he was not subjected to pre-fight drug tests. This seems odd. Surely if one fighter is being tested pre-fight, his or her opponent should be also tested. Yeah, but it could be a lot of different constraints about what's going into that. Chief among them, I think, money is the issue here. It's like everyone's like, why is Metamoris not testing? And Metamoris comes out and says, well, you know, we're going to test his skill, not whether he's on PEDs. And that's true, they are. But let's just be real. They're not testing because they don't have the money. So it's fairly obvious what's happening here. They're not subjected to athletic commission regulation because, you know, they roll like this in the gym all the time anyway. And that's the answer. They don't have the money for it. The debate about this and whether they should or they don't have the money for it. So, you know, make a choice about what you want to have. If you don't think they should be in business, that's fine. I have no issue with that. But let's just be clear about what's happening here. It's got nothing to do with some sort of principled stance about like, well, in jiu-jitsu, size doesn't matter and blah 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 blah. It's like, dude, they don't have the money to do the drug testing. Like, they don't even have the money to have for an ASCAP license to have intro music. You know, let's just sort of be real about this. Conor McGregor, do you think the UFC has put too much into him because he may not even be good and hasn't proved himself? Dude, hell no. Hell no. Biggest problem UFC has right now is stars, and particularly stars that people want to pay money to see. That's like the big one, right? Dude, I don't understand the arguments about this, you know, and I see people saying that, like, well, what if he's a bust? Then he's a bust. Then he's a bust. Then sure, lowering the lights for him and giving him a show and all his brash talk, you know, maybe it doesn't work out for them. You know, that would not be great. I think everyone would say that's not a good thing for the sport. Okay, fine, it doesn't work out. He may wind up not being that great of a fighter and not being able to do enough to ever merit any kind of attention beyond what he gets this weekend. Maybe he gets knocked out badly by Diego Brandel. Maybe, I don't know. Here's what I do know. Well, what if he is good? What if he's very good? And what if his ability to promote himself gets even better? And what if he begins to get so good he can challenge for a title shot? What if that happens? Then the promotion that the UFC gave him, lowering the lights and giving him fan Q&As and pushing him to advertisers and all the media opportunities they've given him, maybe all of that, in the end, looks like they were absolutely justified in doing it. The point being is this. It's better to do it now while you push this and have it work out, then you didn't push it and he winds up actually becoming a pretty big fan favorite. You're making sure that once he matures into a complete fighter at the best of his abilities, you've done everything promotionally to get him there. If it fails, then it fails. And it was never going to work anyway. But at least you tried. At least you put effort behind it. At least you said, we got a kid. He's burning hot right now. We don't know how good he is. There's reason to believe very good. So we know yet. So we're gonna figure this out all the time. We're gonna answer man to man. We're gonna push him. He's gonna do all the things on his side. He does it too. He does know how to sell it, and he does know how to get in front of camera. And he is a charming guy. He does have a crazy story. It is so much. The UFC, like you guys know, a lot of stuff. I think they've done Conor McGregor exactly. Now what did you fight pass? I don't know. Different story. But that he's headlining a show in Dublin, native to their time. They have given him every chance. From a promotional standpoint, advertisers. Media, they have lowered the lights for him on an FS1 debut show. All of that is exactly what they should be. They have handled him very well. And if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. And it was never going to work out. But if it does work out, then you put all the promotional muscle you had possible as this seedling germinated and blew into this, well, how do you want to finish the analogy? That's what you want to do. You want to have a company that had the wind at your back from day one. I don't think they're ever going to try and sell him as something he's not in terms of Well, they might try to sell him something he's not in terms of being a title challenger. But either he's going to win or he's not going to win. Ultimately, that will decide it. But at least from a promotional standpoint, they did the right thing, and I'm really, really glad that they did. Who of the following would you consider to be the best replacement for Joe Rogan? Brian Stan, probably Robin Black, and then Stephan Bonner, and then Bas Rutten. I like all those guys, but Frank Mir is probably even better than those guys too. Pat Miletich is good. You know who never gets any love is Lon McEachern. He's actually really good too. Well, he's play-by-play, but Josh Barnett was good too. All right. Luke, since Holly Holm has been signed, how many more fights does she need in order to be a threat to Ronda? A threat. Probably a lot. If she ever becomes one, which she may not. Let's see here. Hold on. Damn, my Twitter just blew up. Oh, fuck. Audio's on the fritz. Is that better? Is that better? Shit, I don't know. Well, let's see here. Sorry about this, y'all. New equipment. We'll figure it out, but it sounds a little bit busted right now, right? I don't smoke, first of all. Is it bad? It's good again. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Damn. We'll figure it out, y'all. We'll figure it out. Let's see. How many more fights for Holly Holm is before she's a threat to Ronda Rousey? Everyone has to pump the brakes on Holly Holm. She is a... Here we go. Let's see if it sounds better. There we go. All right. Everyone says it's good again. Okay, good. Probably a while, if ever. Holm's a little bit older. Obviously, her striking pedigree needs no explanation. But she is, I'm sorry, y'all, you can say whatever you want. She is untested at a reasonable level at both the striking, in both the jiu-jitsu submission wrestling. So once she's on the mat, having that tested, and then to a second degree in the wrestling department. All of that is untested. It's totally untested. So before she's a threat to Ronda Rousey, she may never be a threat to Ronda Rousey. Or maybe she will be. All I'm saying is untested. Be clear about what I'm saying. Untested does not mean never will be good, isn't good now. Untested means question marks remain. And until we get a firmer answer about which way to go, about what it all means, and about how good she actually is, we'll never really know. So I think they're going to give her somebody in her first fight that will be predominantly a striker and not much of a threat in either the clinch or on the ground. We'll see who that might be, but then there's plenty to pick from. But maybe Sarah McMahon, who's a really good striker, but probably won't ever go for the takedown. Or might. She's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, but you get the idea. The trick to Holly Holm is how she looks. I don't mean like, whether you find her attractive. What I mean is we know she can strike, but we need some kind of a reasonable test to make sure that she can, as the competition steps up a lot, that she looks better. Another question about Carriasso. I'll skip it because we already went over that. Luke, Floyd Mayweather was recently asked by USA Today's Bob Villin about Ronda Rousey's chances against him in a fight. Mayweather replied, "I don't know who he is." He honestly seemed surprised in the video when asked the question in a sense that he actually doesn't know who Ronda Rousey is, let alone that she's a woman. The same Ronda Rousey that Dana White has been touting over the last year being the biggest pay-per-view draw in the company, one of the best fighters in the company, and a woman that could kick Mayweather's ass in a street fight. To anyone that would listen with an earshot, maybe it doesn't really matter in the long run, but boxing or big-name boxers like money really don't pay that much attention to other athletes not in their sports. Other than being the biggest combat fighting star in the world, is it that hard to believe that with Ronda not having anything to do with his bankroll that Floyd really doesn't know who she is? Is MMA really such a fringe sport that Floyd's confusion is that surprising? Or could Ronda's popularity be a bit overblown by the UFC? Listen. Look, all right, so this is an interesting topic, actually, because... Okay. So for a minute there, how do I say this exactly? Listen, there's two ways to look at this. Okay? You could say he knows exactly who Ronda is. And then people have made, I think, seems plausible case. The guy lives in Vegas. His son is into MMA. Rousey, she hasn't been in the movies yet, but, she's certainly done a lot of media. She's a sort of a relatively well-known sports figure by some measures. Although I would wonder how many of my own editors would even know who she is. That might be a kind of interesting question. It's not a lot they know, and they cover sports for a living. But there's reasons to think that her name is on billboards, and Dana White's talked about her and him together. That this may have circled back to him at some point, right? And that to me is a plausible argument. It's not one I personally think is true. I think what's happening is that, listen, I'm not Mayweather's friend by any stretch, and I've only gotten a tiny, tiny little glimpse into his life. I've done a few scrums with him in other media events, and so sort of seen the way in which he's lived a little bit, very, very little, almost nothing. Maybe it means nothing in the end, but the dude lives in his own world. When you are that rich, you just have a bubble around you, and the only things that come in or out are what you want them to, 99.9% of the time. And when they don't, it's when he does these scrums with boxing media, where he holds court, by the way, which you would expect, figure that big, highest paid athlete in sports. But I guess my point is that it is entirely plausible to me that he hasn't paid attention to any of this Rousey versus Mayweather nonsense, that his people around him purposely didn't even bring it up because they know he either wouldn't care or would get pissed by it. And that he doesn't pay attention to anybody else. He thinks the world revolves around him. And when you do that, it's harder to pay attention to the people. I mean, everyone wants to compare themselves to Mayweather, or at least in his mind, and get a piece of his fame and a piece of his attention. To me, and by the way, he often confuses names or doesn't know people. And in the own video, he has ties to Barry Hunter, Lamont Peterson's trainer. Lamont Peterson was the guy who's fighting on the next Showtime card. And he's from D.C., and even in D.C., he couldn't even name who Peterson was. And that's knowing a guy and then not knowing his name, but that's even more than, like, Ronda Rousey. Like, she hasn't even been in the Expendables yet. So to us, she's a big star. So, like, is it true that her star power is slightly overblown? Yes. Is it potentially true that Floyd knew who she was? Yes. Is it equally or even more likely true that maybe he legitimately did not know who she was? Yes. I mean, he seemed like someone made a good point on the internet. Like when people talk about Pacquiao, he gets like kind of like upset about it, And this one, he was like apologetic. He didn't even know who that person was. Who knows? The answer is we just don't know. What we do know is that it absolutely is a devastating way to handle how Rousey has been promoted. And this isn't anything Rousey's pushed, by the way. I mean, she's always said, I can beat anyone in the world because that's what she's going to say, because she's a champion. She's a competitor. But it absolutely was like, it's like Mayweather, like, hitting flies away on a, it's like gnats on a camping trip. Is sort of how that response, what it does to, like, the UFC's attempt, or at least in Dana White's attempt to, like, push Rousey as it's not a rival exactly, but like, that these people belong in equivalent conversations. And Mayweather's like, I'm sorry, I don't even know who he is. It's just a devastating way to answer it, whether it's intentional or not. Gina Carano. I've heard and read several times that the recently signed Holly Holm would need tune-up fights before Ronda, but somehow Gina Carano, who lost her last about 5 years ago, is ready to fight Ronda now. This makes zero sense. I know that the class is shallow, but it seems to me throwing Carano to the Wolf would be a huge waste. I would be way, way more excited to watch Gina fight Ronda after a win or two. If they can throw Carano in with Ronda right away, I'll just watch the 10-second highlight. Yeah, dude, who is Carano going to beat? First of all, can she even make 135? And second of all, she hasn't. Even if she did, who in that division is she going to beat? They'd have to get somebody with a 1-0 record out of Invicta, and even then I wouldn't know if she could beat them. 5 years away from a sport that you were never really all that good at. I mean, partly her skills were overblown dramatically. Is not a good way. You're gonna build her up? No, you do it right away. You do it right away. If she gets torched, then she gets torched. But she still has value after the fact. No. Holm, we know if you get the right opponent, you can at least she can certainly hold her own and probably win. But Carano, nah, dude. You're asking for that fight to be. You're asking for that fight between Carano and Rousey to not happen, and that's okay if you don't want to see it. But that's what you're doing, because it's a dramatic risk for the UFC to give Carano anybody else but Rousey right away. Another out-of-competition drug test failed, with Ali Bagautinov testing positive for EPO in a random drug test prior to UFC 174, and therefore adding his name to the growing list of fighters who have recently failed out-of-competition drug tests. How many more of these incidences have to occur before the UFC realizes it has a big problem? Strictly from a fan's perspective, I'm beginning to lose trust in the idea that the amount of clean fighters in the UFC has anything other than a clear minority. I don't want the UFC to turn into cycling in terms of how the sport cannot be mentioned in the same breath without widespread drug abuse. Well, I can tell you that it doesn't get nearly the same amount of publicity that cycling got, certainly not because of there's no one nearly as popular or revered of a figure as Lance Armstrong, who was a global superstar at his height, you know. So I wouldn't quite make those analogies just yet. I hesitate to make. Everyone's like, it's 50%, it's 70%, it's 10%. I hesitate to make any kind of bold declaration about the numbers. It wouldn't surprise me if it was only 20%. It wouldn't surprise me if it was 80%. You know, somehow both of those scenarios seem plausible. Widespread drug abuse, and then not widespread abuse, but significant enough that you can measure it. Either of those scenarios seems plausible. I guess what I would just say is that the out-of-competition testing is giving you a much closer look at the reality, which is a very obvious statement, but it's an important one to remember here. That the testing in mixed martial arts, this idea that they're regulated by the government, is simply a talking point. And that this new effort by the new administration in Nevada, and I understand this one was in Vancouver, these new, bolder efforts to do out-of-competition testing, meaning just slightly random in this particular case, because it actually was in competition, is revealing a different side of the sport that some have suggested is always there. The question is how deep the rabbit hole goes. It's impossible to speculate, but it's a tough position, man. It's a tough position for the UFC because they want to put on these fights and they don't want people to get tested for. They would rather have clean athletes. I do legitimately think that they would rather have a scenario where everyone was clean, and so they'd never have to worry about a drug test. I think we can all pretty much agree that would be the ideal scenario and one in which the UFC wants to have. And I think that they want to do the right thing, which is why they're pushing for more increased drug testing, which is why they're paying for more. The question is, how far do you push it? If you're really worried that so many of these guys are on it, then I would be a little bit worried about pushing it further, and they are pushing it further, So they're for now they're taking gradual steps. I think that's really the key here. The key here is that they're going to take gradual steps so that they slowly expand the encompassing nature of their random testing to the point where they're going to catch a lot more people, but they're going to slowly establish a certain normalcy so that the people who maybe previously were cheating no longer are, or that people who are getting into the game know it's significantly more difficult than it used to be and probably not worth their time. Some will always cheat. I think we all know that, but I think that's the difference, is they want to get better with it, so they have to slowly expand the parameters of it. I think if they just ballooned it wide open, they'd have a lot of problems, and I understand that. I'm sympathetic to that. But let's also, from a cost standpoint, let's also just sort of move these goalposts out a little bit further at a measured pace. Luke, a Glory fighter, I think it was Robin Van Roosmalen, recently came forward claiming that Glory and Bellator are in talks to co-promote fights or events now that they have Spike and Viacom banner. Have you heard any rumors about this or anything to add to it? I have not. I have not heard anything. Not that it's not true. I don't know. I also haven't asked anybody about it. So, also, I'm a bit surprised this wasn't discussed earlier when Glory first came to Spike. Was Bjorn against something like this when he was still the owner of Bellator at the time? It seems almost like a no-brainer. My understanding was I don't think Bjorn was the biggest fan of Glory being on that network. No, and I don't think Scott Coker sees that as a bad at all. I think he sees that as a part of a combat sports portfolio that can attract people, not all the same people, and yeah. Yeah, someone linked up the article. It's Robin Van Roosmalen, who is, by the way, if you've never seen Robin Van Roosmalen fight, god damn, dude, old boy can thump. He is a Terminator, man. His fight with Shemsi Bachiri, and it's spelled Bakiri, but he even told me himself it's spelled Bachiri, was ridiculous in person. And I know he came up short against Risty, but he is nasty. He's very nasty. Another question, Demetrius Johnson versus Chris Cariaso, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Do you think this is because the UFC is getting desperate for flyweight contenders, or are they just incompetent of who to distinguish as a real title challenger? No, they know who is a real title challenger, but they have cards that have needs, and those needs have to be met, and once that happens, it becomes a process of elimination. But that's my point. This is a card built around the process of elimination. It's not a card that was built organically because this was some impulse to answer fan demand. And that should tell you all you need to know about the different kind of events that they have. Some events are more fortuitous, so when they want to compete with Bellator, they were already going to have a strong card, and then it got the bonus of some of those canceled 176 events. And now UFC Fight Night 50 is ridiculous. Okay, it's a ridiculously good card. But there's a difference between building a card because there's something there you want to build around. The only thing they're building around is a contracted date. What match would you like to see at Metamoris? A Joe Rogan match? God, who would I like to see? People are asking me on Twitter, by the way, like, oh, how would you feel? Because this is what they plan to do. The winner of Josh Barnett versus Dean Lister will get Buchecha. And everyone's like, well, you love Buchecha. Don't you love this idea? Not really, man. I don't see Buchecha getting tested hardly at all by either guy. It's not very interesting to me. He's better gi than no gi, but even then, he's getting better every year. So, like, it's not particularly compelling. Who would I like to see? I like to see Murillo Santana because I think he's very good no-gi. They want to go that direction. I'd like to see who would I like to see? Hamalo Bahal. I'd like to see some judokas who know Newaza, if there are any out there that you could realistically put in there. I think that'd be kind of fun. Travis Stevens, I'd like to see. Travis Stevens is a bad dude, man. Olympic black belt Olympian for the United States, and worked his way up in jiu-jitsu, and just got his black belt under Renzo Gracie in jiu-jitsu. That's a bad dude right there. Tim Spriggs is another one I'd like to see. Leandro Lowe, the Meow brothers. Who else would I like to see? Maybe some more women's matches, Nyjah Easton's real good, But I still think, man, everyone's like, oh, the 20-minute no points sub-only format is the best form of jiu-jitsu. I'm like, for a spectator's standpoint, no. I like it. Don't get me wrong. I think it's awesome. You know, it's fine for me. But if you want to tell me that's objectively the most exciting, you're high. It's just absolutely not the case at all. Certainly, some of those bouts and matches can be really good. Gracie versus Bravo 2 was pretty damn exciting, but 20 minutes, man, is an invitation for somebody to really sort of methodically take their time. And I don't know, since when was that the fan friendliest? It's just not true at all, man. It's just not true at all. Keenan Cornelius was saying, you know, when someone takes your back in practice, you may just sort of let them do it and slowly work your way out because you know you can. But in a tournament, man, if someone takes your back, you got to get out. You got to get out. Or if someone gets the pass, they have to hold the pass for 3 seconds. You got to fight your ass off to not let that 3 seconds happen. So you got a lot more action. Now, there is some stalling too, but that's a function of just changing the way in which stalling is enforced, not some sort of huge indictment on points. And like I was having discussions with some of my teammates, man, I think they're totally wrong. Everyone's like, you should be penalized for guard pulling. Dude, why? Why would you be penalized for guard pulling? And they're like, well, in a street fight, if you pull guard, you know, you automatically start at a disadvantage. Dude, this ain't a street fight. So it's not okay to pull guard, but you're going to use reverse De La Hiva, right? You're going to use spider guard in a street fight, are you? No, you're not. Like, there's so much of sport jiu-jitsu you would not use in a street fight. You would go for the takedown, and you would pass, and you would go for a mount. The entire bottom game would strictly be as a method to control. There's so much of what we do that people say is totally fine, but then guard pulling becomes some sort of scapegoat for false jiu-jitsu because it's not related to street fighting. Dude, we're so far away. Jiu-jitsu has morphed. It has all the things that jiu-jitsu has morphed to a place where it can help you in a street fight, and it definitely will. Don't get me wrong. It hasn't moved away from that. It's still got all those things, but it's got a lot of other things now too that have nothing to do with self-defense. It's strictly for sport jiu-jitsu. Yet none of that is any problem. Just guard pulling. It's like a totally selective way of describing a problem. Anyway, there's your answer. Burying the straw weights. Luke, what do you think the reason is that the UFC is only giving the 2 strawweight fights that they have on tap a spot on Fight Pass? I'm curious because both fights have top 10 women on them that aren't going to be seen by the majority of people. Given the fact that everyone on Tough 20 will fight one another through the tournament, it would seem that the obvious first challenger to the new title holder would be one of these women that did not compete on the show. It would seem wise to give them spotlight, considering they could be main or co-main event in subsequent fights. I think Gadella and her Finnish opponent need a lot of work. I wouldn't say that at all. They can be ranked highly, but they don't seem very polished to me just yet. Moreover, I think that the UFC is waiting to introduce this weight class all in one go. These names will be difficult to remember down the line. They're going to introduce. They're already going to introduce a bunch of names all in one go. It's better to just sort of have everyone focus on them and then build people around it as some move up and some fade than to, well, we're going to start with these. Oh, and there's also this whole cast of women coming. I think they're trying to make sure they sort of point all the guns in one direction here. Judo throw hip toss. Luke, would it kill Rogan to learn the names of some judo moves instead of saying judo throw or hip toss? Or perhaps have someone who knows tell him in his ear? I know there are a lot of names of throws, but since we see them fairly regularly, I would appreciate if the UFC could do this. Yeah, I've been wondering that too. I've been actually meaning to make a video. We have a guy in our gym who was an Olympian from Mongolia in judo. It's not a joke, a real dude. And he's a bad dude. He's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but he's a black belt in judo, obviously. And he's incredible. And so I've been thinking about having a video where there's not many throws you see in judo. There's a couple trips, a couple throws, in judo and MMA, I should say. Most common is Uchimata and Harai Goshi. Those are the 2 most common. There's other ones too, but I was gonna do a video because he's smaller than me, but he's obviously just like ridiculously strong. I was gonna have him make a video of, but I haven't even pitched this to him. I was just thinking in my head. I was going to do a technique talk where we do like Judo 101 for MMA, and he just throws me with all of his throws that you see in MMA most commonly, Harai Goshi, Uchimata, and some other ones. But Seonagi. Anyway, I haven't even approached him about it yet, but I'm thinking about doing it. Are UFC heavyweights getting smaller but more athletic? Luke, does it seem like the days of giant heavyweights like Lesnar, Mir, Carwin are over? They've been over for a while, dude. Seems that the top heavyweights are around 230 to 240 pounds, but far more athletic, flexible, and faster, like Miocic, Velasquez, Brown. Is this how you see the heavyweight division evolving as guys favor speed and agility over pure size and strength, or will it always ebb and flow? There will be some ebbing and flowing. I don't think that it will always be this way, because I think there will be some guys who will be like Lesnar, who have to cut to make 265, who probably have big-time power. Derek Lewis is a big guy. We'll see how far he can go, but yeah, I think, listen, there was a while there where you saw Carwin coming up and you saw Lesnar coming up and having a lot of success, and people wondered, okay, is this the future of heavyweight? These big, huge, and Carwin eventually got smaller and smaller, but you were sort of wondering about the big-time power punchers and the heavy top control wrestler. Is that what you're going to get? And I think what you found is that it's not so much the linemen. So you sort of, to borrow from football's positioning, it's not the linemen that you're talking about that are going to be the big-time stars in heavyweight MMA. It's going to be the tight ends, right? It's going to be the guys who are 240, 6'4", who have explosive power, who can jump high, who have gas. They're going to have less than flyweights, obviously, all the time, but that is a much better prototype because you're big and physical enough to impose size and strength. You're still quick enough to have the athletic kind of scrambling you need, and you have just the right proportions, assuming all things go well, to keep your conditioning high. Barrow's quick turnaround. It will only be 3 months and 6 days from Barrow's lost and next fight. He absorbed an immense amount of damage over the course of 5 rounds. Not only that, he was knocked down multiple times and finished badly. He's surprised that no one in the media or otherwise has mentioned how fast he was able to be cleared. Also, his chances do not seem good at all, considering he has had little time to recover and evolve. I actually hadn't even thought about that. That's actually a really good point. The commission wouldn't clear him if he hadn't fulfilled proper medical protocol. The question is the medical protocol in place effective enough to keep him safe? There you go. That's a funny comment there, actually. True or false? Ben Henderson will clean out the lightweight division and get a third fight against Pettis despite being 2-0 against him. True. TJ Dillashaw, not clean out, I don't know, but he will get a third title shot, or third fight against him. TJ Dillashaw will stop Renan Barão in under 3 rounds. False. DJ versus Carriazo won't go past the first round. True. Being a BJJ black belt isn't as important as it once was. It's very important. It's just not as all-encompassingly helpful. UFC secretly hoping that Mendez defeats Jose Aldo because of Aldo's inactivity in division that they are trying to build up. I don't think they want him to lose. I'm going to say false, but I do think they're like a little bit like, okay, either you can keep up or you can't. Chris Weidman will destroy Vitor Belfort. True. Uriah Faber's idea about using lie detectors to find out who is or is using PEDs is a great idea. False. They're not even admissible in court in most places. Dana White has a personal vendetta against John Jones. That's why he is not being promoted as the face of the UFC. False. John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson 2 will be better than the first fight. True. Do you think that the Ultimate Fighter is worth doing for fighters nowadays? I think if you're not a blue chip prospect, could be good for you. But if you're not, if you're struggling to make it into the UFC, it's probably a great way to get in. Let's there we go. Let's Would UFC cancel this from Twitter? Would UFC cancel a pay-per-view Big Fox card over a failed drug test of a main event fighter? Unlikely, but I wouldn't say impossible. When will UFC come to Croatia, easily filling 18K Arena Zagreb on minor kickboxing and MMA events? And We want to see Stipe Miocic, and the costs to do business there are low too. I don't know. It's a good question. I'm sure at some point. The question is, they have the Fight Network there too, a different Fight Network, not the Canadian one. The question is probably what kind of distribution they can get, and the time zone. Have to be a Fight Pass card. Doesn't the Mighty Mouse fight go along with your thought that squash matches are a good thing? Up until the championship level, yes. Someone says, I asked a bunch of my American friends if they knew who Rousey was, and none of them knew who she was, but they did know who GSP was. I can believe that. Let's see. How much do you think Weidman made from UFC 175? Until we see the pay-per-view buy rates, impossible to say. Impossible to say. Let's look at the chat, shall we? I always miss it in the end, which I don't want to do. Here we go. My friend thinks he can do this UFC stuff, but he continually gets his ass beat. How do I tell him it's not for him? Don't. Let him try it. Luke, what are your thoughts on Aljamain Sterling and Alex White on tonight's card? Yeah, my predictions should be up by now. It's really interesting, actually. Aljamain Sterling is in a tough fight with Hugo Viana. I picked Aljamain because I think he could probably avoid the heavy punching and win with wrestling, but it's going to be really, really tough. He's going to have to really, and not be able to use the cage either. He's going to have to, which he doesn't necessarily need to, but if he can have a better performance than his last time, he should be all right. But for me, Alex White and Lucas Martins is a little bit different. Martins is a better striker, but both don't have a lot of head movement. Even that fight what White had with Esteban Payan, I mean, he dropped him pretty quickly, but he was getting hit a few times. And Martins is going to be able to do that. The question for me is the durability of White going to matter, or is the superior Muay Thai of Martins going to matter? Odds makers have had White ahead, which I don't, as the favorite, which is fine. I don't mind that necessarily being the case. I kind of wanted to gamble a little bit. I picked Martins. Nothing would shock me about White winning. I think he's a very, very tough kid. But I sort of went with a superior Muay Thai striker, even though Martins has been blasted out by Barboza and other people he's been hurt by as well. So even in Junior Hernandez fight, he got hit a little bit. So I'm a little bit worried about the pick, but those are two really interesting fights on the card. It's Lucas Martins versus Alex White and Hugo Viana versus Aljamain Sterling. The question is, and also another one, it's not the most sexy fight in the world, but Jos Denis Cedeños versus Sherrod White, I believe is his name. God, I didn't even get it right. Christ, it's pathetic if I didn't. The American Top Team dog. Let's see. Yeah, Jos Denis Cedeño is taking on. Christ, my internet is so bad. Yeah, excuse me, Gerard Sanders. What am I even saying? Gerard Sanders. Gerard Sanders, this is another interesting one because if Cedeño has the striking style that is super reckless, he loves to go for these spinning heel kicks, and that's when he gets taken down a lot. You saw that in the Chavez fight, right? But if you go straight at him for a takedown, he's actually got a pretty good takedown defense. Sanders has no footwork to speak of. He's basically a pure wrestler, but he's got really good submissions. He's got an awesome half guard on top, but he can finish you. So that's a really that's a very much striker versus grappler kind of thing because I just don't see how Cedeño is going to go through the fight not kicking like he likes to kick, and White is just going to, or excuse me, what am I saying? White. Sanders is just going to stay there until that kick comes around, time it, and then go on top, and he can do that from there. Chavez was able to do that too, and then passed him out. So, so we'll see. I don't know why I keep wanting to call that dude Sherrod White. How big can McGregor get? If McGregor continues to destroy people the way he did Brimage, how far do you think he could go in regards to stardom? Surpass Rousey, GSP, Chuck? I mean, let's one step at a time. One step at a time. But what I would tell you is I think what could be an interesting benchmark, being both a huge star in Ireland and whether he could be a pay-per-view star in North America while pay-per-view is still relevant. That could be interesting. Whether he could be a European who can win a UFC title, so not just Irish, but European-based. That's big. Gustafsson almost did it, but he wasn't. Those would be pretty significant accomplishments. I mean, can anybody be Chuck Liddell? I mean, we don't live in an era where Chuck Liddell became a star anymore. It's a very different era. I don't know if that kind of stardom is really popular outside of very, very, very unique circumstances that may, some like LeBron James quitting and coming to MMA. I mean, that would be pretty significant, right? I don't know if that Chuck level of superstardom is really possible anymore. It might be. Just nothing on the horizon that indicates it could be. But McGregor has. Listen, there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about McGregor. Let's just put it that way. Mike Chiappetta. Do you think the oversaturation of the UFC burned him out? No. Don't. Could you share a Chiappetta story? Yeah, I don't think oversaturation was responsible for what Mike is doing. I mean, if he wants to talk about it publicly, he can. I'll just leave it at that. UFC Dublin selling out as fast a bad thing? Is it a bad thing that the Dublin event sold out in record time? Do you hear yourself? Do you hear yourself? As the card is very, very weak. Yeah, it's not a great card, but it's got a huge main event for the people of Ireland, and it's sold out in record time. Why is that a bad thing? People will keep asking me, like, will the UFC does that mean the UFC will always be able to bring, Fight Pass quality cards there? No. Eventually, Irish fans, if they go back continuously, eventually Irish fans are going to say, we want a better card. But they're willing to forgive it this time for any number of reasons, not least of which is that Conor McGregor is headlining it. Yeah, it's been 5 years. What are the chances that the first Bellator pay-per-view sold more than UFC 174? It's very possible. Okay, I'm just going to skip this oversaturation question. See, they're asking me, y'all. I'm not just bringing it up out of nowhere. I wonder if there's anything up with the UFC bringing Cub Swanson to Dublin. What do you think? Here's a weird question. International fight fans. Luke, just how smart are the international fight fans? It's obvious that the UFC is giving them a diminished product than their usual fight card, and yet Dana said they want to have more of it. Well, yeah, because they haven't had exposure to the UFC product yet. But I think over time what you're going to find out is they're going to be just like every other consumer. They'll be tolerant of, in initial stages, of maybe substandard quality because they want to see their hometown guys. But over time, their taste will become sophisticated, and they'll want to have the very best. I don't think that's just it's a natural progression. Is Vanderlei Silva at this point so delusional that he believes he is free to fight? He might be. He might be. By the way, I didn't mention this on Amanda Morris. I'm going to keep mentioning this because I haven't seen anyone else talk about it, and it's the truth. Like, everyone's like, oh, what match would you like to see at Amanda Morris? Dude, let me tell you something. That Kit Dale versus Gary Tonin match, watch out, dude. That match is going to be ridiculous. Two guys who are very skilled, who have tremendous gas tanks, who are very innovative grapplers, two risk takers, two guys who get after it, constantly attacking. Man, I'm telling you, I would be shocked if Kit Dale, Gary Tonin is in the match of that whole card. I'd be shocked. Who would you want to see home fight for her first three UFC fights? Dude, I don't know if she's going to make it past the first one with a win, much less second and third. She looks awesome in her first one. I think they give her a title shot in the second. She looks okay. Then they probably give her another one in her second, and then Rousey in her third. I don't know. Has anyone else noticed that all of the current UFC champions, save one, are American? I think we have noticed. Questions. Is this potentially a big problem from a promotional and marketing standpoint, given the UFC's desire to expand into international markets and increase their global brand? I don't think it fast tracks the process anymore, but I don't know that it's necessarily a long-term hindrance. Because, by the way, that's going to ebb and flow too. Gustafsson could beat Jones, and McGregor might wind up being a big deal, and Jose Aldo might hold on to that belt, and Barao might beat Dillashaw. It's currently a place in time, but let's see how long this American tenure lasts. 2, what do you attribute this fact to? Is it all the best gyms are located in North America? Well, not all of them are. Many of them are. U.S. has better feeder programs for MMA athletics, like the Olympics and wrestling. Certainly, the latter one is partly true. We all know about the feeder system that amateur wrestling has been for us, which lacks in a lot of other countries. Although that's changing in some capacity, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, listen, MMA didn't start here necessarily. The origins are a little bit confused. Part of it was what happened in Brazil. Part of it, in a more modern sense, was what happened in Japan. And then part of it grew out here, but there's definitely been a resource shift where the best practices and most of the money is here. So when you take that with the feeder system that you mentioned, it's just sort of natural that it would have more talent here. It's more popular here. More guys have been recruited to try it here. And when I say here, I mean Canada too. But that may change over time. We'll see. McGregor's knee-saving performance in the Holloway fight. Thinking about Conor's knee in the last fight and him saying if he felt it go, which was the reason he had to keep it on the ground. Then considering when Carlos Condit had a similar injury, as soon as they stood up, it only took one kick to finish him. Do you think Conor should have been given more credit for his knee-saving performance, or do you think that was overlooked? It's a good question. I'd have to go back and watch the fight, but certainly banging it out with someone like Max Holloway in the feet when you have a damaged knee would be not the wisest course of action. And I do think, again, we don't really know how good McGregor is just yet. It could be awesome. He could be. We're going to find out. But it's when you hear things like that, which I think is a pretty salient and interesting point, gives you hope that he might be something special, because that is what you call fight IQ. People often think of fight IQ as simply offensive decisions that lead to the most kind of damage. But fight IQ can also be about self-preservation, not risk aversion outright, but self-preservation, where I have to make this difficult choice in order to keep the fight going, and it speaks to his mental toughness too. It's a lot of interesting things like that when you hear. I think it's an interesting point that you bring up, and tells you a lot about what kind of guy he is. Let's jump around here a little bit, see what kind of questions we have. Bloop. Let's see what's up here. I got to do something about people not being able to see this video. Did Overeem use TRT before it was banned? No. Here we go. What'd you think about the article you shamed? Excuse me. What'd you think about the article you shared about the MMA journalist trying MMA? I wrote it, but don't hold back. Well, first of all, if you should read this article, I think it's from AZ Sports. I don't want to get that wrong, but it was on Reddit, which is where I found it. First of all, it's a very important piece to read, because a journalist who had been covering MMA tries it against a very, very young kid and just gets. You should read it. He gets beat down and loses an amateur contest, and sort of it was so eye-opening for him about how difficult it is to get good in MMA that he was like, I'll never criticize anyone again. So on the one hand, let me just say props to the guy who wrote it. It's an important piece to read, because I've often said the same thing. MMA is so difficult to get good at. There are very, very few guys who do it well. Very few guys who do it well, because there's so many things that can go wrong. So many things that can go wrong. However, as a piece of, I think, criticism here, what I would give back is that, it could have just been an overreaction at the time which it was written because of how tough the experience was, and that's understandable. But I think if it's you who wrote it, one of the things you had said, would never criticize another MMA fighter as long as I live, something to that effect. And I don't think that's the lesson to take away, because otherwise we wind up being in a position where we don't really do our jobs very well. Someone has to push back against fighters. We are allowed to have analysis. We are allowed to say our opinions. But if you're in the media, those opinions need to be informed and they need to be responsible. And a lot of that is missing. But I don't think we should overcorrect to a position where we're like, I just can't even criticize these guys anymore. No, you can. And everyone's going to tell you, what do you know? You couldn't do it. That's true. But I don't have to be president of the United States to make criticisms of him, or senators, or congressmen, or my mayor. You don't have to do all the same things that they do in order to have the relevant expertise to have an opinion. Certainly, being those things would make the opinions even more informed and responsible, potentially, but not necessarily. And the truth is, even if you've done those things, it doesn't mean you can have that you have an ability to articulate criticism in a way that is salient or interesting. So no, we are allowed to criticize fighters, but we should do it in a way that makes sense. We should do it in a way that where we're constantly looking for information to better our own understanding of the sport, and that we're delivering in a way that is fair to the sacrifice that these guys. I mean, yes, they are prize fighters, but it's a very difficult exercise that they go through, even if it is a voluntary one. We should have some sort of reverence and respect for this very, very difficult activity. So I think it's an important lesson that the author learned, and it's a great piece to read. I recommend it for everybody. But I would take a slight issue that the lesson there is that you just can't criticize fighters. That's not the case. Not for me, certainly. Let's see. Would UFC be a bit more popular if the first UFC on Fox was a result as Kane JDS 2 or 3 or Hendo Shogun 1? I don't know, man. Like, those are better fights, certainly, but one has to wonder what the audience would have thought seeing something like that. Maybe that's really difficult to say, because for fight fans, that's like red meat. For non-fight fans, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. Let's do a quick one here at the bottom. All right, no, actually I gotta go. With the most recent fight announcements from Bellator for their Connecticut card, does the UFC add bigger fights to this card than already announced, or have they won the battle no matter what Bellator announces? The card, a UFC card against Bellator card, is not even a contest. Certainly, current Pitbull 2 is a really good fight, but the UFC card is, in terms of quality, infinitely better. But what Bellator is doing with Spike is Spike has more reach, and getting guys like Bobby Lashley, it means they're going to pull in people who don't ordinarily watch MMA, whereas I think UFC is going to get most of the MMA audience watching them. So the numbers might be comparable. Bellator might even win, to be perfectly honest. It wouldn't be crazy, but it's not because they're pulling in a bunch of MMA fans. They're just having the same or more aggregate numbers from pulling from non-overlapping audiences. All right. With that in mind, I have to go. First of all, sorry for the microphone problems. I'm still trying to figure this out, but shout-outs to Dark Toby for helping me out with this thing. In the end, once I get it right, this will make the whole thing better. I will get the recording for this up as soon as possible. My predictions are up on MMAfighting.com right now. We'll have coverage of this tonight, and we'll have coverage of the presser. We have our group, Casey, Esther, and Ariel are all in Ireland, so we'll have photos from the media day up there, videos, interviews, you name it. And then, of course, Saturday night we'll have a bunch of stuff for, or Saturday afternoon, whatever that is, for UFC Fight Night 46 with Conor McGregor versus Diego Brandao. Should be really interesting. Thank you very much for attending. Please share. I'll get the video up to everyone that I can. You guys are the best. Until next time, stay frosty.